Madam, please start.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the session. We have the pleasure of having with us today the eminent and leading well-known psychiatrist, thinker, playwright, musician, poet, sketching artist, and social activist, Dr. Anand Nadkarni. He is a multifaceted, multi-talented personality. We'll welcome you, sir, today for this session. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone who has joined this webinar. This is a great initiative in this week that coincides with all the activities of de-addiction, as well as today is the day of birth of our father of the nation, Gandhi Jayanti. So on this day, we are starting this webinar, and the topic given to me is knowing addictions, understanding addictions, and why addiction is a subject or de-addiction is a subject of not only medical interest and psychiatric interest, but also of social and cultural interest. So we are going to take an overview of this entire topic in a short time of around 35 to 40 minutes. And then we will open it to questions. You can write your questions at the end, and Dr. Manjusha, who is the anchor, who will coordinate some of those questions. Addictions has a long history, as long as human civilization, because humans always needed a kind of a different consciousness to experience what is very popularly called as high. All human beings have a need for change. All human beings have a need to experience something unusual and thrilling. And all human beings have a need to experiment, to seek pleasure which is not common. Because all pleasures, when they become common, they lose their shine. And human mind starts searching out for newer and newer sources of pleasure. Now, what is the problem? The problem is that the human mind gets entangled with what we call as short-term pleasures at the cost of long-term pleasures, long-term goals. And that is where the problem of addictive behaviors comes. There is no dearth of such substances. Right from our everyday coffee and tea, to tobacco, to alcohol, to narcotics, to cannabis, to cocaine, to stimulants, to psychotropics, to depressants. And the list is as long as a menu card or product list available at the restaurant or in the supermarket. And new chemical addictive substances, new chemicals are always added to that list. What is common in all these substances is their innate ability to make either or our mind and body dependent on them to a lesser or a greater extent. There are some like cannabis that have psychological dependence but no physical dependence. And there are many that have both the psychological and the physical dependence. It is the dependent making ability of these substances and the pleasure seeking mind that comes from the personality, added by the socio-cultural realities of that particular individual, all three of them, that constitutes the concoction of addiction. So some attributes come from within the person, some from the chemical, and some from the circumstances in which the person lives in. All that produces a concoction that leads to what we call as dependent behavior. Now, how do we differentiate that this person is a mere consumer of addictive substance? That person is abusing that chemical abuse, or that person is dependent. So these three terms are used in this addictionology branch of psychiatry: use, abuse, and dependence. The use is obviously casual, it's low in quantity, and it does not interfere with the important goals of life for that person. It doesn't interfere in productivity. It doesn't interfere in relationships. It doesn't interfere in health. That is called use. Like suppose a person is having 2 cups of coffee or 2 cups of tea, then that is use of an addictive substance. All right. But it has less possibilities, almost nil possibilities to cause problems in his or her health. But there are sensitive people who can have problems with this also. But I'm starting with tea and coffee for that. It's not so good for many of the chemicals which are there in this list. So abuse means that when all these factors start getting affected, and when we call it dependence, that to even get a sense of normalcy, semblance of normalcy, in day-to-day life, the person has to take support of the chemical. That is when we say that the dependent pattern has emerged. That now the person cannot define himself seemingly normal without that chemical. And that is called as dependence. This dependence is of 2 types, as we said. One is the physical dependence, where if the person doesn't consume this substance, then the body starts rebelling. Almost every system can participate into it, what are called as withdrawal symptoms. So if the alcoholic does not drink, then he will start getting tremors. So that is something which tells us about physiological dependence. When the person in the morning will not take tobacco, he will get constipation, physical dependence. So physical dependence on one side and psychological dependence on the other side, which means that whatever is the emotion that that individual is experiencing, that emotion can work as a trigger for next consumption. I'm tired, I will consume. I'm depressed, I'll consume. I'm happy, I'll consume. Which means every emotion becomes a trigger, and now my goals in life, my health, my relationships, my productivity, and even my pleasure, my leisure, everything becomes the substance itself. So that is where we call that it is psychological dependence. So the person, the individual, is cut between these 2 blades: physiological dependence and psychological dependence. There are 3 words which are important. The first word we say is tolerance. Tolerance means when the person moves from use to abuse to dependence, his quantity of consumption will increase, and he will also go for higher concentrations. That is called as tolerance. In the world of addiction, this is called as capacity. It is said that his capacity increases. In fact, it is decapacitation, not capacity increase. But that is what is tolerance. So a person who starts with, say, beverages of lesser alcohol content will move on to beverages of higher alcohol content, landing to the highest, which are sometimes illegal. Same can happen with different chemicals, wherein the concentration of that chemical will go on increasing. That is tolerance. Then comes dependence, which is the word that is used and that we discussed. And then comes the third word that is called as withdrawal. That now the clutches of dependence are so much that the person, as if a dear one has gone away, what we call as grief. So the grief in addiction is called as withdrawal. In our real life, we do experience a lot of tasting incidents of grief when we lose somebody. Now, here is a temporary grief, but still the reaction is as extreme. So that is called as withdrawal. Now, when tolerance, dependence, and withdrawal come together, it could be one substance or a combination of substances, chemicals. The journey of addiction starts, and it leads to problems in all areas of life. It can. And that is why I said that the productivity goes down, which means even for a student, even for an entrepreneur, even for the person who is having a job or a profession, the relationships go for a toss because this person now becomes so much dependent on that substance that all other goals start losing meaning for him. He's preoccupied, almost obsessed with the next consumption. So relationships go for a toss. His own health, physical health goes for a toss. His leisure is defined only in terms of having or consuming these chemicals. Then the question will arise that if this is a person who is an adult, who has normal intelligence, who has educational qualifications many times, why does that person indulge into this? Why this person cannot see what the world can see? Why this person continues the self-defeating pattern of his behavior and thinking? The answer to this is that by this time, the person has developed what we call as craving for that substance. Craving, and craving is that word and that process is the crux of dependence. And therefore, dealing with craving in healthy manner is de-addiction. So when craving develops, which is obsession, which is preoccupation, then the mind starts developing sturdy defense systems around that craving to fulfill that craving. What are these defenses? The person would say that I am consuming and I am in control. So nobody may interfere in my life. That is called denial. He will project his own craving onto the others, that it's because of all of those people who give me this kind of stress and negative emotions that I am drinking. Or he may displace emotions, that because of a failure in a certain area of my life, I'm now drinking. These kind of sturdy defenses are getting erected in that person's mind. And then what happens is that this person becomes his own slave. He enslaves himself or herself. And that is why he loses what we call as rationality. He starts losing his own emotional regulation. he may faintly see the possibility of him coming out of this. There have been individuals who on their own have come out of addiction. They can, without any professional help, even when they were in the dependent phase. But that is true for only a few of us. Most of us will require some kind of professional help. Because by that time, it's not only the personal health, both physical and emotional, but the total life has started getting mismanaged. And that calls for help. Family help, social help, as well as professional help. But then what comes in between? What comes in between is that dear friend of ours called ego. I can manage. I don't want help. Finally, I am going to leave that addiction. No. So why do I want that help? Our addict friends will say, during the holy month of Shravan, I do not even touch a drop of alcohol. So I can stop. Why do I need help? So at that time, we have to redefine help. That our addict friend does not require help to stop alcohol or stop the substance. He requires help to learn how to not restart. So we go with our patient. We tell that person, our friend, that you don't require any help to leave, but you need help not to restart. That's all the treatment is, how not to restart. You'll require new thinking. You'll require a new set of emotions. You will require a new set of skills to learn how not to restart. And that is the help that the profession has to offer to you. So sometimes the person starts realizing this. This is called the process of motivation. But it takes some time for people to motivate. And sometimes there are triggering events that motivate people to see his or her addiction, addictive behavior, in a different emotional light than how that person was seeing it sometime before. And that is the time when actually help is to be given. I always say that there are two determinants, two attributes, that the person has to feel that he needs help and he should get help at the opportune times. When that combination comes, then we see that the prognosis improves or the person is more likely to leave the addictive behavior. Now, once that motivation comes the professional help. So let's now come to the professional help part of it. The professional help that is given for people who are having addiction is first the medical and the psychiatric help. Medical help, of course, for his physiological dysfunctions, including liver and skin and various deficiencies that that person can have, from neuropathy, to skin problems. That is the physical or physiological aspect. The psychological aspect involves what we call treatment of that withdrawal first. So that is where the acute psychiatric management comes. And we have different kind of withdrawal regimes for different kind of chemicals and substances. So the withdrawal has to be monitored, sometimes on an OPD basis, outpatient basis, or sometimes under the supervision in an institution. Generally, the withdrawals take 2 to 3 weeks, uncomplicated withdrawals. The person can come out in 2 weeks. 1 in 5 withdrawals of all chemical addictions can have complications. So 20%, which is a high risk. And that's why wherever you have a multidisciplinary team that is functioning together in any center, there are better chances that the withdrawal will be handled well. So 2 to 3 weeks, generally in an uncomplicated withdrawal that gets over, the person is physically, physiologically better placed. And the ego comes up and says that now I'm good and now I want to go home and I promise that I will never touch that substance. Is this promise false? No. This is genuine. This can be sincere, but it definitely is a ignorant promise. It is a promise that is based on ignorance, because this promise totally avoids the talk of psychological dependence. Now the withdrawal has taken care of the physical dependence. The doctors have started, filling in the gaps of deficiencies in their prescription. The psychiatrist has started treating the depression or any other psychological symptoms that that person has carried in as comorbidity. But now is the question of dealing with the mind. And that is where individual counseling sets in. That is where self-help groups such as Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotic Anonymous, Gambling Anonymous, all of them set in. That is where the rehab centers set in. Because more the conditioning of the chemical, more the duration and intensity of help. So people require help. People require help at all levels, individual level. Sometimes the OPD kind of help is not sufficient. Then we have to think about giving that person help in terms of a rehab center. Again, the stay at rehab center may differ in terms of duration, but rehab center is essentially intense treatment. What does it change? In a rehab center setup like the one that we have, Muktangan De-Addiction Center in Pune, we try to structure that person's daily routine into a variety of constructive options. We give him constructive choices. So that person would have in his daily routine some amount of sports, some amount of library time, some amount of gym time, some amount of recreational time with music and screen. So constructive options, they create the platform on which therapeutic inputs are given. So at our center, Muktangan, we have individual counseling going on, family counseling going on, and there is actually a curriculum of learning the skills to deal with craving. And this entire curriculum, because people ask us, why one month, why 2 months? Because people take their own time to learn. And that is why you require time and you require a curriculum. And what is important is you also require a continuous feedback about your learning. All this is possible in a setup like Muktangan. So the curriculum completes, the person starts working, the person gets a new taste of his socialization. The person starts making new friends, the person starts learning about cooperation, since most of the functions of a place like Muktangan are run by the inmates themselves. In psychiatric terminology, we call them patients. In the rehab center, we call them inmates. But at Muktangan, we call them friends. Everybody is called a friend in Muktangan. So we say Mitra, we say Rugna Mitra. We not even say client. So what is required is a milieu. The milieu that gives you acceptance. The milieu that does not label you and blame you for your past. Not only to deal with your craving, but multiple healthy options on which you can base your own recovery of total health. So that is what we call as the total treatment. Now we need to understand that this person who suppose is taking treatment, either in rehab center or on outpatient basis, is away from the chemical. Then what? So that is called as follow-up. Follow-up means that whether this person follows up with a rehab center, with a counselor, with a psychiatrist, with a support group. Why? Because the process of learning that has started should not stop. He goes to AA meetings, he goes to follow-up meetings of rehab center, he comes to counselor, comes to psychiatrist. Follow-up is needed to charge and recharge your batteries. So follow-up in multiple forms, the availability if it is there, and the person takes benefit of that follow-up, then it increases his chances of staying away from addictive behavior. And here the focus has to shift. When the person comes in treatment, he wants to leave the addictive substance. Now, he has to learn how to reshape his life, how to take care of that craving which can come anytime, and that craving may not be for a particular substance. He has to also try and learn to deal with cravings in life. And without cravings and without attractions, there is no life. So he has to reshape his life. He has to redevelop his relationships. He has to set himself back into chosen occupation or job. He has to restore his credentials in the social and family milieu that he is a part of. So many challenges. Sometimes there are problems with economics. There are loans. There are promises to be fulfilled. He has responsibilities. And mind you, each one of these can be a potential to kindle the trigger of craving. And that is why you require follow-up help. And there is one side, the challenges, and on the other side, if learning goes on, then the person is improving what we call as his or her coping capacity. Coping capacity has to improve, has to change towards better, because the challenges are going to be there. These are, in a way, outcomes of that person's previous behavior that he will have to face. And for that, he will require a support system. And if he is on follow-up, one support system is ensured, that is from the professional side, support group side. And the family support also becomes more meaningful if this person accepts the professional support. So people will ask that how long is this follow-up? People who have been in follow-up for many years will definitely agree with me that lifelong. The texture will depend. The texture will be different. But now your recovery from addiction has come to a level of dealing with coping, then has come to a level of reshaping your life, then comes to a level of relearning of life. And when it comes to relearning of life, you cannot learn more if you don't start giving. Giving is a part of learning. So a person who has a stable recovery also has an objective and option. to share his knowledge and experiences with others so that his learning becomes better. So when he becomes the part of the chain of recovery, then there is no follow-up. There is only chain of recovery. So that is how the whole process goes in of changing an individual. It's no more de-addiction. From de-addiction to transformation. I have seen this for a long time with my friendship with my addict friends over 4 decades now. That it's not we start with de-addiction, but it's human transformation. It has taught me that all human beings have a capacity to fall, but they also have a capacity to rise. There is a limit of human infallibility, human fallibility that I have experienced. And from that fallibility, people have rose back, becoming better human beings, more empathic human beings, more responsible human beings. So that is how the treatment of addiction goes. Now, it's not only the person who is involved. There is his entire family, spouses, parents, children, and they all require support. We at Muktangan have different support groups. We have groups for our patients, our friends. We have different activity for wives, that is called Sahachari activity. So we have surgery community kitchens, we have surgery groups, we have online groups of the spouses and parents, and there is an inter-group of all these groups, what we call as Sahachari Setu. We have a support group for children, what we call as Ankur. And now all these groups are available online because children are at the receiving end of a very problematic developmental phase in their life. So they require help. So family participation, because in our society, still the families do not disown a person with addiction to that extent as in the West. And that's our forte, that's our strength. And we need to therefore include the family in the whole process of recovery. At times, we have to also involve friends, well-wishers, extended families, employers in this whole process, because finally it's a social problem. It takes a toll on the most productive years of human life. So involving all these factors in the society, involving all these important factors in the society is also a very important aspect of treatment. Then comes the sensitization of the society, trying to reach out to society so that this whole information reaches to different age groups through direct communication, through writing, through making films, through social media. So that is where you will see the whole gamut of helping that person to recover comes to, from individual to family to community to society. And since addictions has this social angle taking toll on productivity, it's important that all factors come together. And that's why, in addition to the general psychiatric population, the mental health population, mental health professionals population, more and more physicians, more and more experts from medical fraternity, paramedical fraternity, if they start contributing to the field of de-addiction, they will be helping the mental health initiative to be more holistic. And that is something which is very, very important. Many times we have challenges to rehabilitate our friend back in the society. We have to address his occupational and career needs. That is where again pillars from different vocations and professions in the society can come and contribute. So essentially what is important is transformation of that person requires a combined effort. The story starts with medicine, it starts with psychiatry. But it comes to a time where the entire society needs to contribute and accept that behavior, that yes, people can make bad choices. People can make unhealthy choices. But we should not damn people for their choices. We need to look at the behavior not as a sin, but as a mistake, a costly mistake. But the mistakes mostly happen because of ignorance. Ignorance not only at the level of information, but ignorance at the level of emotions and beliefs, which is a deeper ignorance. So that is why people indulge into these kind of behaviors. And they also require the same kind of empathy that we would give to a person who is having, say, a dire physical illness. We look at a person with, say, cancer with a lot of empathy. But for a person who is having addiction, there are many people who will shun that person, will say that he is an immoral person, he is a bad person. And that is something that we have to deal with, even the medical profession, all the society, without labeling the addict how to deal with addiction. So treat it as a unhealthy behavior, unhealthy pattern of behavior, unhealthy way of thinking and emoting. And then the person deserves a chance to come up. When people talk about success rates, I do not believe them above an extent. I think for me, each one of my patients is 100%. And from my side, I have to try 100% to help him change. And do they? They do. Organizations like Muktangan, who will now in next 3 years will complete 4 decades, 40 years of its meaningful existence, has been built on the shoulders of my colleagues, many of whom have been recovering from their addiction. They have been able to build an organization which has ISO accreditation, which has received President's Medal for the best organization in de-addiction. The people who have been blamed for the worst things in life, which they have done, can build. The minds that can destroy can be very constructive. This is a living example. Muktangan is a living example of that. Provided they are given that acceptance, that empathy, and new skills and knowledge in a milieu that is very, very non-judgmental. And work in de-addiction, therefore, has actually helped me as a professional in many ways. It has added to my skills. It has added to my patience. It has added to my acceptance. And it has given me more confidence in the goodness of all human beings. These are the days when the bad aspects of human beings are harped so much in our conversation and in media that we all have started believing that man at the core is a beast. But we need to understand that man has beastliness and godliness both. And therefore, it's important to understand that the goodness in a man also requires a chance and acceptance that both the good and the bad, the sat and the asat, are there in the same mind. And addiction, therefore, has a lot to teach all of us about life, its miseries, its challenges, and also the capacity of some of us to rise back like a phoenix and reshape their own lives and also help the field of de-addiction. So therefore, addiction can be understood from many, many angles. But at the base of it, it's the story of human being. And the more we understand the human being, more we will start understanding about addictions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And we have a couple of questions. The first question is from Dr. Kulbhushan. He asks, when shall we consider mobile an addiction?
It's a very good question. I left that from my discussion today because right from the beginning I spoke about chemical addictions. And I had made it very clear since the start of this dialogue that I will be talking on chemical addictions. But behavioral addictions, what you are talking about, is a very important new subject that is coming in this field. What we call as screen addiction is a part of the behavioral addictions. Even gambling is. Even all these games that are coming up on television screen for selecting teams and all those. So it's a rampant addiction. It would require another lecture, and I'm sure we will have another webinar on it. But behavioral addiction post-COVID is posing a very new challenge. There is a debate to whether to call screen addiction as addiction. We have started calling it more a screen obsession. Because screen now being an integral part of your life, generally when we say addiction, the policy is of abstinence. And you cannot abstain from screen for educational, professional reasons, communication reasons. But if we say it's screen obsession, then the regulation, therefore screen regulation is the goal, screen abstinence is not the goal. So changing the whole philosophy around screen obsession and how to give skills to individuals to regulate their screen use is going to be a great challenge.
Okay. Dr. Kulbhushan also asked, what are the tips you would give for the family of the addict?
The first tip that I would give to family of addicts is please look after yourself. That your addict family member is part of your life. Your addict family member is not equal to your life. And therefore, you should always think about your own health and your own goals in life while helping the addict. Secondly, our fight is against addiction, not against the addict. On a daily basis, do not communicate emotional data when that person is intoxicated or in withdrawal. Because once you do that, you are adding fuel to the fire. Try to maintain the rhythm of your own life, whatever you can, in spite of the addiction. Plan your life so that you get least disturbed by the addictive behavior of that person. Maintain openness and keep on telling that person that you are there with that person whenever that person wants to change the choice. So these are some of the important tips that these people can imbibe. It's very easy for me to give these tips, but family members require support. So therefore, we have support groups. We have also support groups for couples who are coming out of addiction, what we call as Sahajivan Gat. So they also require reshaping their relationships. So giving the tips is very, very easy. but to get those tips into action, people require continuous support.
We have a question from Dr. Swami. Is there a genetic basis involved in addiction?
Yeah, there is. As we said, the personality. When I started my dialogue, I said the craving comes partly from the personality, and personality comes from total 4 variables. The first variable is called as nurture, that is the genetics or the chromosomes. Second is called, it is called the nature, which is genetics and the chromosomes. Second is called nurture, that is conditioning. Third is called culture, that is circumstances. And fourth is called signature, that is uniqueness of that individual as to how nature, nurture, and culture are going to work in that person. So now your question is about the first attribute, and that is nature, that is chromosomes. In the human genome study also, people have identified certain chromosomal structures that can have influence on metabolism of alcohol in the central nervous system. And because of those metabolic pathways, certain people are more vulnerable when they are dealing with alcohol as a molecule. That is one very important aspect of the genetic studies, that how alcohol is metabolized, how alcohol is treated by your system is influenced by the genetic structure. The genetic structure also, in a way, contributes to the experiential part of consumption of any addictive substance. So, in a way, we can sum it up by saying that the chromosomal structure adds an important vulnerability in that person. That vulnerability is carried in that person. Suppose the person carries that vulnerability and refrains from that substance, then of course the outcome will not be there. But as we know, it's not only the genetic vulnerability that operates. There have been studies of people who have had their first degree relative showing addictive behavior and they were in contact with that person. So it is nature plus nurture. Say, for example, father or mother. And they saw that there are 3 ways in which these people developed. All 3 ways. All 3 ways means some of the children of addicts, they became addicts. Some remain at the social level or the youth level. And some developed such a nauseating taste for that substance that they never touched. So all 3 outcomes were possible. So it's not only the nature, but it's the concoction of nature, nurture, culture, and finally the signature. Everything matters.
Dr. Swami has a query. How do you contact Muktangan?
Yes. I think we will share all the details of Muktangan, but muktanganmitra.org is our site in Pune. So I would request the hosts and organizers to share the Muktangan website and numbers with all the participants that we have in today's webinar. And if we are recording it, then we could share it with the recording also. It is situated in Pune. www.muktanganmitra.org is our website.
Yes, sir. We will share this, sir, with all India psychiatrists. Yes, sir. Thank you.
We have a question. What are the most important questions to be asked in a follow-up treatment?
Before you ask any questions, you have to observe. Because you know that when your patient comes for follow-up, how is he looking and behaving? How the family is looking and behaving? And in no time you come to understand what are the matters that are happening there. If there is a recovery, then hope is written large on their faces. They come to you with a smile. If your patient comes with dropped shoulders, and a gaze that is downwards, you know that something has happened. Many times, you know the answer before a question. So it depends on how you observe, how your bonding is, what is your relationship with not only your patient but the family. And then from that emerges the first question, not from the history book.
Thank you, sir. I think these were the couple of questions we had. Thank you for that enlightening session. Thank you so much. We thank the audience for participating in the session and see you. Good day.